Well, hello, Forest Meadow, and welcome back to another episode of our Sermon Reflections. And for those of you who joined us on Sunday, you know that we spent some time once again looking at the passage where the apostles, they're flogged and they refuse to stop teaching and preaching in the name of Jesus. And they once again, they use a very similar phrase when talking to these leaders. They say, we must obey God rather than men. And so we took a look at unjust suffering and how suffering is really not our favorite subject. We really don't like to talk much about suffering and hardship because it's just not that much fun. But the truth is, throughout church history, we see believer after believer who is suffering, who are enduring hardship, who are going through types of persecution, all because they are following after Jesus and trying to honor him. And then they recognize in those moments that a student is not greater than their teacher, that if they persecute me, they will also persecute you, is what Jesus said. And so that gets me thinking and reflecting upon what we do when it comes to our discouragement as we encounter whatever hardships they might be. In one situation, they might be persecution, but sometimes they can just be difficult circumstances. You know, this is something that Paul the Apostle really understood very well because of how many of these things he endured. And so it stirred up my heart to want to read to you this passage. I'm going to read to us briefly from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16. And Paul says this is Paul's letter of depression, so to speak, so I call it at least. Therefore, we do not lose heart. But though our outer man is decaying, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day. For momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. And so the question really comes to mind, what exactly gives us hope whenever we're going through hard times? Whether we're going through hard times, like I said, because of persecution, or whether, like Paul in this time, he has gone through persecution, but he's also just going through difficult times. At one point in time, he can't find, I think it was Titus. He has suffered shipwreck. He has gone through a whole number of things. He's had to pass around this letter. He's seen division within churches. And Paul is there. He is trying to pass along this message, and he is just filled with discouragement. And with that combined together with persecution at different times, depending on what place he was in, Paul writes these words that we have to look at the eternal things. As Colossians said, which Paul also wrote, by the way, he says that we have to fix our eyes, right, upon heavenly things. We have to look upward and fix our eyes on the things above and not on the things that are on earth. We have to fix our eyes there. And whenever we see the eternal things, I think it encourages us to continue fighting the good fight while we're here on earth. Nobody wants to endure trials. Nobody wants to go through really difficult times. But when we do, what happens, at least this is what I've noticed, and this is what Paul writes, is that it teaches us to fix our gaze upon an entirely different kingdom. God's kingdom, an entirely different realm, the eternal realm, not the temporal realm. We have a tendency, and I understand it's very natural for us to look at the things that are taking place here on this earth. But the truth is, we need to fix our gaze upon Christ. We need to look at heavenly things. We need to spend our lives storing up for ourselves treasures in heaven. And I think when we do that, it really changes the trajectory of our lives. So that's one of the thoughts that I had. And so I hope that this passage gives you some encouragement that you're not the only one who goes through hardship. You're not the only one who goes through trials. Other believers long before us have gone through them, and these are the types of things that they write. Another encouraging passage that is kind of hard to read for many believers is Hebrews chapter 12. And it's all about being disciplined by the Lord and not shirking it off, but instead embracing it and saying, Lord, teach me. I want to share your holiness, and I trust that you're going to do something. I trust, Lord, that you're going to reward me for the things that I do and how I honor you with my life. I'm going to fix my eyes upon Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despised the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. And so another thing that I want us just to consider is when we think about we must obey God rather than men, is I want us to think about our walk with the Lord as always being a walk of submission. In other words, there's never a time in our life as believers where we are not called to be submitted, right? We are always to be submitted. And so here's the difference, and Dave Beutler really pointed this out quite well, is all of our submission is submission to God. And even when we have to rebel, even when we must say, like the apostles, we must obey God rather than men, even then, our rebellion or our disobedience towards the civil authorities, towards the governing authorities, our disobedience is actually submission to Christ. And so we're not called to be a rebellious people. We're called to be a submissive people, submissive to God. And normally, under most circumstances, that means listening to whatever authorities that God, by his sovereign power, has put above us. Normally, that's what it means. And then in some exceptional cases where they command us to do something that is against what God commands us to do, then we can disobey. Whenever they tell us that we have to do something, and in order to obey that command, we must disobey Jesus' command, we are to obey Jesus' command. We stay submitted to our Master, who is perfect, who judges perfectly, and not only does he judge perfectly, he also rewards abundantly for our suffering. We don't enjoy it, we don't like it, but I want to remind us once again what these words say. That momentary light affliction. You should read the whole letter of 2 Corinthians to see what Paul is referring to when he says light affliction, right? He has a whole chapter on it. Momentary light affliction is producing for us something, an eternal weight of glory, far beyond all comparison. In other words, brothers and sisters, look at what God is going to reward us with. He will make it worth it. We have the rest of eternity to spend with him in his arms. And we have such a small amount of time to spend here. And we might think, boy, this is really hard. This is really difficult. Brothers and sisters, our time here on this earth will soon end. And he will carry us into his own kingdom, where we'll stay with him for the rest of eternity in a place of paradise. God has promised these things to us as believers. And so we should grab hold of these promises, eternal promises, not promises for success now, but promises for blessing and an eternal place of paradise for the rest of eternity. We have to grab hold of those things, and when we do, they will keep us encouraged while we're here. While we look not at the things which are temporal, for the things, right? We don't look at these things which are here. We don't look at the things which are seen. Those are temporal. But we fix our gaze upon eternal things, which are also unseen things. So is it a challenge for us? Yes. But this is why the Lord's Prayer encourages us to pray kingdom downward. Our Father, where is he? In heaven. Hallowed be your name. Exalted is your name. Lifted up is your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done. Notice how in the beginning of the Lord's Prayer, we start praying kingdom downward. And so that is how he teaches us to pray. That's what actually keeps us encouraged, is when our gaze is upon him and his eternal kingdom. And so that's my challenge for us this week. Well, let's go ahead and move on to our questions for the week. Our first question is this: were the apostles punished for doing what was right? And what qualified it as such? Number 2, Was the apostles' suffering unjust? And did the council have justification for the sentence? Number 3, how did the apostles respond to this suffering? Number 4, what determines those to whom we submit? Number 5, how does disobedience or rebellion affect our witness? Number 6, how does suffering well and suffering unjustly affect our witness? Number 7, how does suffering glorify God? Number 8, why did the apostles rejoice? And finally, number 9, how should we respond when we as believers are persecuted? And for that, you can consider Luke 21, verses 12 through 19. Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time to join us today. As a quick teaser, this upcoming week we're going to be looking at when the apostles realized we're getting a little distracted from our main purpose of the ministry of the word and of prayer. And so we're going to raise up for ourselves deacons. So we're going to look at this passage in this upcoming week, most likely 2 weeks. And so we hope that you take the time to join us. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Thank you so much for your desire to dig deeper into the scriptures, and I hope you have a great day.